So there we go.
Okay.
And then we'll put it here. So that gets that. Magic happens.
Okay. So a lot of people who are here are already part of Amare, so you know we're a mental wellness company. If you're new and this is the first time that you're jumping on, it's important for us to say we're a mental wellness company. And a lot of times we'll talk about the mental wellness continuum. We'll talk about the fact that, and I'll show you a graphic of this in just a few minutes, the idea that some people are on the low end of the mental wellness continuum and they might be struggling with depression and anxiety and really don't know where to turn next. But a lot of the people that we're going to talk about tonight are in what we consider to be a chronically stressed category. And that's sort of the middle zone. Did I hit that one? Okay. Oh, there we go. That middle zone is really characterized by people who have chronic stress, who are stressed every day, not this kind of high-level stress. It isn't that's really the problem out there. The problem is this sort of medium stress that's with us 24/7. Bills, traffic, deadlines, family issues, relationships, that kind of stuff is the kind of stress that it's not going to kill you today and it's not going to kill you tomorrow, but the unrelentingness of it, the chronic aspect of it is really what makes it bad. And I want to give you guys a perspective for how that just really saps not just our mental wellness, but our physical health as well. So here's the topic for tonight: stress. Burnout in psychology research is the opposite area of my specialty area of research, which is Vigor. So you can see the definition of Vigor there on the screen. Vigor is defined as this sustained three-tiered mood state characterized by these three things you see here: physical energy, mental acuity, and emotional well-being. And very often what we see is that if somebody has the label of burnout or the label of adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, they will differ a little bit from each other, and that's why we'll categorize them one way versus another way. Like, why do we say that this is chronic fatigue versus fibromyalgia when they have so many similarities? They've got a little bit of differences, but at their core, they're a lack of energy and a lack of acuity and a lack of well-being, or a low level of all those three things. And so when you're in that situation, you're not going to say necessarily that you're burned out, or you might not say necessarily that you have adrenal fatigue, but you don't feel good. You know that you feel kind of suppressed and kind of like you're lacking that spark, is another way that people will say it. And so you're on this mental wellness continuum. You're probably in that quote unquote normal zone, and we should actually probably change that. It's not normal that people are there. It's typical in the 21st century, right? That people find themselves there and they end up chalking it up to, well, I'm getting older. Maybe this is the way I'm supposed to feel, or my diet could be better, or I've gained a little bit of weight, or I've got all these 25 hours worth of things to do in a 24-hour day. Of course I don't feel vibrant and vital and vigorous and all those sorts of things every single day. I shouldn't. And I want people to realize that they should. They should feel that way. You should feel in that optimized category, that 8, 9, 10, up in the dark blues and the purples. That's what the human condition should be. And it's important for us to let people understand that no matter where you are on this mental wellness continuum, we want to try to get you to the right-hand side of that. And there's natural ways we can do it. Some involve the gut, some involve the microbiome, some involve rebalancing neurotransmitters and optimizing what we call the gut-brain axis. And we're going to talk about what some of those natural interventions are on the call tonight. So, real quick, this is going to be recorded. So if you want to come back and look at these statistics, or actually go to the resources section of the amare.com website and see a lot of these slides that you can download for yourself. And reason that we start off with this grim reality is to let people realize it's not just you who feels it this way. It's not just you who's struggling with chronic stress or burnout or any of these sorts of things. It's literally hundreds of millions of other people who are spending hundreds of billions of dollars. It's a massive, massive category. No matter what demographic you're looking at, men or women, young or old, rich or poor. I mean, it really is something that affects everybody across every demographic you can think of, and affects them in a way that is really like, meaningful in their lives, right? I've been doing this work for many, many years. My first book about stress was published in 2001, 2002. So, and I was doing this work previously before I decided to, write a book about it. Now it's 13 books that I've written on these kinds of related topics. So, the thing that really stands out to me is that these issues, chronic stress, and the things that we'll talk about tonight, people brush them off because they think there's nothing they can do about it. And it's our job at Amare, and it's our job as wellness partners or as customers to let people know there's plenty, absolutely plenty of stuff that you can do to get yourself in a good place. Get yourself from not where you want to be on that mental wellness continuum to a place where you feel better, and then eventually to a place where you feel amazing. And unfortunately, in the context of lots of people struggling with these issues, there are lots of things that people will reach for to try to make themselves feel better. If you're stressed out and fatigued and brain fog and all those things that kind of characterize that state of burnout, you're going to reach for an energy drink, or you're going to reach for a frappuccino, or you're going to go talk to your doctor about, why can't you be in a happy mood in the day, and why can't you be relaxed and have a good night's sleep at night? You're fatigued in the day and you're restless at night. What's the solution for that? Well, in a lot of places, it's take some Prozac and take some Ambien, and that is a terrible situation. I'm not. People have heard me say this before. I'm not anti-pharmaceutical in general, but I am anti-pharmaceutical when you haven't tried some of the lifestyle interventions first, when you haven't tried a natural therapy that in a lot of ways is going to be more effective than any of those synthetic routes in the first place. So you can see here, just on the brands that you see on the screen right now that people are either being medicated or self-medicating with, that's $100 billion every single year in expenditures just in the United States. So you can see that this is a lot of people who are looking for an answer to help them feel better. And the thing that really just flabbergasts me is that what people don't understand is that every single brand that you see on the screen right now is definitely going to change the way you feel. It's going to take you from feeling how you feel right now and make you feel different. But not a single one of these is going to make you feel good. It's not going to restore your vigor. It's not going to bring your adrenals back. It's not going to, reduce your chronic fatigue or your fiber or any of those sorts of things. What you need for those is a multifactorial solution. You need something that really gets in and addresses all the different things that might be out of balance, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we can look at that $100 billion number just in the United States on the expenditures that you saw for the brands on that slide. But when you step back from it and look at how big this is globally and how big this is in sort of a ripple effect from that, it's really in the $1 trillion range, right? There really is no bigger health issue out there right now from a global perspective than these mental wellness challenges. In fact, I don't think I have it in this particular deck, but the World Health Organization has characterized mental wellness issues, depression, anxiety, and stress, chief among them, as the number one leading cause of what they call global health burden. So it's not just what's directly causing the problem, because if you're stressed out, there's a ripple effect into your energy levels and your appetite. If you're stressed out, you have biological drive to choose different kinds of foods. That's one of the reasons that junk food and fast food is so predominant. Well, it's everywhere, so it's convenient, it's inexpensive, but biologically the stress is driving us to crave that kind of food. And those food companies, they're not idiots. They know that. They know that the more stressed out we are and the more in this quagmire of stress responsiveness, the more we want those hamburgers and French fries and milkshakes and cupcakes and candy bars and sodas and all that kind of stuff. We're biologically being driven towards that kind of stuff. So over the next decade, 2 decades, this is where the story is in terms of a medical story, a scientific story, a health story, a natural medicine story. It's all coming back to this. And the thing that's really cool about that you've got this timing, is that the science is changing around this area. And I'm really going to focus mostly on the science tonight. So here we are in April. What is today? April 19th. we're smack dab in the middle of National Stress Awareness Month. Just a couple of days ago, we had National Stress Awareness Day, and I did a blog about how stress is just epidemic proportions, in the United States. So much so that you're getting mainstream publications. CNBC did a survey, and here's this statistic that they published the other day. 63% of U.S. workers said they regularly engage in unhealthy behaviors such as drinking to combat work-related stress, right? So here's CNBC coming out. You can't get much more mainstream than that, right? This isn't just some little esoteric scientific study. This isn't just some little, alternative medicine journal that's talking about this. This is mainstream. New York Times on the 7th had an article. Many people taking antidepressants discover they cannot quit. And the article was about people who got on antidepressants thinking, oh, well, I don't feel very good right now. I'm going to get on this antidepressant, see if it can help with my mood, and then I'll get off of it when I feel better. And now people can't get off of them. They're hooked because there isn't anything for them to step down to. They try to get off of that high-dose antidepressant, and they get side effects. Sometimes those side effects bring you to the emergency room. And this article had so much play. So many people commented on it. So many people shared it. So many people read it that they did a follow-up story just yesterday on the 17th. The follow-up story was antidepressants and withdrawal. Readers tell their stories. And so there are just hundreds of readers going in there and saying, yeah, me too. Yeah, I tried that. Yeah, these are the side effects that I had. What we're looking at now in terms of people who are hooked on these antidepressants and anti-anxieties and sleep drugs and ADD drugs is probably going to be bigger than the opioid epidemic that we find ourselves in right now, where people got on these pain drugs thinking that they'd just be on it for a couple of days, and they've been hooked now for a lifetime. And absolutely ruining lives, ruining families, killing people. The antidepressant, anti-anxiety, ADD, sleep drug one is going to be even bigger because there's so many millions more people who have been prescribed these drugs when maybe a natural option would have been better. I talked a little bit about this at an event that we had recently in Phoenix. And I was lucky that, so I'm a PhD, right? I'm a scientist. I'm not a medical professional. The gentleman who spoke right after me was a medical professional. And he talked about this exact concept of his patients having trouble stepping down from those antidepressants. They're stepping down from this very high dose, very potent drug to nothing, right? They're coming off the tightrope, and there's no safety net below them, and so they have these terrible side effects. And he was talking about how he's using Amari products in his practice as that step down, right? As a place where we can bring people down to, where now not only do they have a place to step down to where they feel okay, but now they're feeling better because it's addressing these issues in a much more holistic, much more comprehensive way. So
yeah. So listen, this might be my only chance to give any kind of value to a deep dive talk at all. But in the area of stress, I'm on the plane today coming out here, and in the USA Today, the money section, the whole thing is Americans struggle, right? Americans struggle with financial stress.
Right.
So, you add that on top of all the other things that you're talking about, and all of a sudden Amari certainly has the perfect answer for both sides of those equations. But the fact that it's there is just that way, right? And so, anyway.
Yep. And just adding on to that financial stress. So that was USA Today?
Today, yeah.
That's great because, every year the American Psychological Association does a survey, Stress in America. And one of their questions is, what are the things that stress you out? And number one, every single year, it's financial stress, right? It's the number one thing that causes stress, and it causes chronic stress, because what happens with financial stress is it's the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning, and it's the last thing you think of when you go to bed at night, right? It is the definition of chronic stress because it's always there. It's always informing every one of our waking hours. So the thing that gets me particularly excited about this area is that there's lots of people who have lots of problems, spending lots of money, not getting the solutions that they're looking for. But the science has changed in this area dramatically over the last couple of years. There's things we can do in the brain, and that's always going to be important. There's things that we can do in the what I would call the periphery with our, how our stress hormones and how our adrenal glands sort of work. But a lot of the new science is taking us away from this focus on the brain, where we're perceiving the stress and looking further down in the body, looking at the gut as the first target to say, wait a minute, a lot of these stress signals can be modulated if we look at the gut in the proper way. So this idea of the gut-brain axis, and especially, if the bacteria in the gut are changing and the integrity of the gut is changing, how are those signals getting across? How are those signals going from the second brain in the gut to the first brain in the head, and vice versa? How are those stress signals from worrying about our financial stress? How are those signals going down and disrupting the gut? It's going through this axis. So this axis, a lot of what we're doing at Amare is optimizing and making this axis more efficient, so it can carry those signals in an efficient manner. Some of the signals are going through the nervous system. Some are going through the hormones like cortisols and adrenaline, which now we call epinephrine, and norepinephrine and GABA and a variety of those sorts of neurotransmitters. Hormones like cortisol, hormones like testosterone, hormones like even metabolic hormones like insulin and thyroid can be interfered with by this stress hormone cascade. Immune system cells, which carry a lot of those signals, cytokines, which are signaling molecules and inflammatory molecules. So that's how the signals pass back and forth. And if you're overly stressed, those signals are going to be fundamentally different than if you're calm and relaxed. If you're stressed and anxious, those signals are going to be fundamentally different than if you're resilient and have what we refer to as an attenuated fear response, right? If we can make you calmer, if we can improve your stress resilience, your whole signaling changes. It's like the difference between a very clear cell phone call versus static, right? We want clarity. We don't want static. And if you're continually getting this stress static, that's going to lead to physical disruption later on, where tissues actually start to break down. So let me walk through each one of these categories. I want to talk a little bit about chronic stress and burnout. I want to talk a little bit about adrenal fatigue, and then the difference between chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. Because what we end up seeing is, in all of those situations, it's chronic stress that's the root cause. But how that stress expresses itself, or how that stress manifests as a symptom that you can point to. People are hardly ever pointing to stress, but they will point to their fatigue. They will point to their brain fog. They will point to their pain. They will point to their exhaustion, those sorts of things. But it really all comes back to this overactive chronic exposure to stress hormones, chiefly cortisol. So first thing is, I want to focus you on this really cool concept. I think it's really cool anyway. It's the Yerkes-Dodson curve, right? And it's used with athletes, and it's used with exercise physiology, so that we can gauge the amount of stress that we're giving to athletes. We want to give them enough stress so that they adapt to it and get stronger and faster and bigger and things like that. But we don't want to give them too much stress, because then they get sick, then they get hurt, then they break down, right? So it's that balance point of a certain amount of stress is good and too much stress is bad. But also not enough stress is bad, right? Then you don't get any stimulation of those adaptations. And so what you see on the left-hand side is that actual Yerkes-Dodson curve. So you can see if you're too far to the left, you don't have enough stress, and you're not, you might be bored. Something might be too easy. It's not lighting you up. It's not getting you excited. Then we get to the middle part of the curve, which is that sweet spot of that bell curve. That's where you want to be. That's what we call eustress, or good stress. And that's where you're energized and you're focused, and the work feels challenging, but there's a balance between the challenge and the effort and your exertion. An athlete would call that the zone. But this same concept that we've used in athletes for years has now percolated into the business community, right? And this is how, if you're looking at human performance from a business perspective, or from a psychological perspective, or from a personal empowerment perspective, that's the zone that you want to be. You don't want to be down on the no stress side, right? That's no fun. That's just boring. You want to be in the middle, but you don't want to go too far. That's when we see executives starting to flip into burnout and leading to things where they say, well, now I'm burned out, now I'm stressed, now I'm tense, and that's where executives start to reach for alcohol and drugs, and you get addiction issues, and you get health breakdowns. And so it's the very, very same concept that we really can apply to any stress situation. Again, wherever you are on that mental wellness continuum, and you can see it's the same sort of a concept is jazzed up a little bit on the right hand side of this slide, where you see the stress curve. We want to make sure that you're in that optimal performance zone. This same exact concept can be used if you're way down on the mental wellness continuum, or you're in the middle, or you're at the high end. And the high end people are going to want to use it as a way to keep themselves in that sort of on the edge of burnout, right? You don't want to flip to burnout, but you want to get in there and you want to have your highest performance every single day without breaking. Other people who are in the middle just want to feel good again. People who are way down just want to feel normal again, right? So the same concept can be used. And so there's good stress, there's low stress, and there's too high stress. And we want to make sure that we're having the right exposure. A big piece of this, before I go off of it isn't so much just the stress that you're exposed to, it's also the recovery piece of it. Right? So that idea of what does your stress resilience look like? We've all had the experience of, something that normally wouldn't stress us out on certain days, we can't even deal with, right? That's because our stress resilience, our ability to deal with that level of stress is maybe not not up to what it should be. So we don't want to have high stress and low ability to cope. We don't want to have low stress and high ability to cope. We want to make sure that those are optimized, right? So on days when you have high stress resilience, you can handle more. And on days when you have low stress resilience, you can't handle quite as much. That's the idea if we think about it again from the athlete perspective, there's your workout. And is that a hard workout today? Well, yeah, if you're fully recovered. But if you're still a little bit low because of a hard workout yesterday, your workout today has to be dialed back a little bit, right? So it's the exact same concept, whether we're talking about athletes, executives, moms, dads, students, anybody who's in between.
Here's the challenge though with that is that oftentimes we don't get to dictate what the stressors are, right? We don't get to decide whether we should work out harder or have more stress or less stress. Those stressors are coming at us. So we only have one way to really do it, right? And that's the ability to increase our ability to handle it.
That's right. Yeah.
And that stress resilience is what we find happening in almost all the testimonials of the products that you develop.
Right. Right. And so that's sort of the moral of the story, right? That stress is always going to be coming at you. And so if you can improve your body's overall capacity for dealing with that stress, what we would broadly call stress resilience, now you're able to handle whatever comes at you. And on days when I say this to people, like, you're going to get to a new point where your stress resilience is higher. You're going to be able to accept a lot more, and you're going to say, wow, this is great. I'm in a good place right now. What a lot of people end up doing is they feel better, so they take on more. And so now they need that stress resilience, and now they're pushing themselves to the limit of what their stress resilience is. And so now you might need to do something else because you've accepted a higher level of stress load. So that's one of the reasons that our products are specifically formulated to be flexible usage. You may find that there's a level of product or a combination of products that you use to get you to that new state of stress resilience, and now you're doing awesome and you're feeling great and your vigor is back and all those sorts of things. But then on some days, your exposure to stress might be even higher, and so someone would go, you know what? I needed an extra sleep tonight in order to relax, or I needed an extra mood in order to deal with the you-know-what when it hit the fan this afternoon. Like that kind of stuff can help us modulate our level of stress resilience based on what our stress exposure is going to be. So why is this so bad? If we think about stress as just being stress, it really doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening here. When we talk about chronic stress, right, your ability to deal with that stress is not quite where it needs to be. You have a slight overexposure primarily to the stress hormone cortisol. And short term, cortisol does a lot of wonderful things. Short term, cortisol is good for your immune system. Short term, cortisol is good for your energy levels. Short term, it's good for your brain and your clarity. Short term, it's wonderful. We want cortisol around. It's an important part of our stress response. But when we start to get overactive chronic exposure to cortisol, cortisol should go like this. It should rise in the morning to help wake us up, and it should slowly go down through the rest of the day, reaching its lowest point in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., when we should be completely at our deepest level of sleep. But what happens is it doesn't go that way. It rises in the morning to keep us up, and then it stays high all day long because of all the emergencies that we have and the worries and all the things that I said before that stress us out. And so the difference between where it should be down here and where it is way up here because of our stressful lives, that's that chronic exposure, overexposure to cortisol. And when we're overexposed to cortisol, it becomes catabolic. It literally breaks down every single tissue in the body. It breaks down your muscles, so you lose muscle mass, and that lowers your metabolism. It breaks down your immune system. It breaks down all your connective tissues, including your bones, including your skin. It's very detrimental and catabolic to neurons in your brain. So those go away very quickly. When I do a cortisol lecture, I'll actually show brain scans and show neurons and say, here's a healthy neuron. Look how great that looks. Here's a neuron that's been exposed to chronic stress. And you can actually physically see that it's shrunken, that it's broken, that it looks sick. And you don't have to be a neurologist to see the difference between a healthy neuron and a chronically stressed neuron. Like, it looks ill. So when we get that, it might not happen right away, right? This is a chronic, insidious, slow breakdown of those tissues, and very often you won't even know that there's a problem until you get sick, until you get an ache, until you get some sort of a problem in your body, until you wake up, before your 20-year high school reunion, and you look at your stomach or your waistline and you go, where'd those 30 pounds come from? Well, they came little by little by little because of that cortisol exposure. So that's the thing that's really insidious about it, is that it sort of sneaks up on it unless you've educated yourself about it and say, wait a minute, we need to get this under control so that it doesn't slowly break us down. Going back to this idea of a little bit of stress acutely coming and going, stress of a deadline, and then the deadline goes away. Stress of a family event, the wedding is coming, right? And then it goes away. The difference between that, which can be perfectly healthy and perfectly energizing and really help us, versus the chronic effects of that, just like draining us, breaking us down, making us feel blah. There's kind of like chronic stress can cause problems, but then they can lead to a lot of like these sort of like psychological, where you just don't get enjoyment out of life anymore. It's one thing to be stressed out and kind of tense and angry, but eventually that tense and angry gives way to just blah, where something that used to make you happy, now you don't get any enjoyment out of it. Something that should give you a good happy emotion and make you motivated, you're just kind of like flatline. That's when it really becomes a problem. And the big problem is that person now is disinclined to look for a solution, right? They're in a state that we call sickness behavior. Some people have heard me talk about this. It's difficult to differentiate. Is that person burned out or are they depressed? Because they're both exhibit that same sort of leave me alone, don't talk to me. They're not open to seeking out solutions for themselves. And that's one of the reasons it's really important for someone who's gone through this process, who has gone from a state of burnout back to vigor, and you feel amazing, or you're in that high amazing state and you're doing whatever you're doing to stay there and not flip into burnout. I think it's an obligation for people who are in those good states to reach out for the people who aren't and help them, right? Because they're not going to be proactive about it, and they're not proactive about it because they're biochemically in a state where their body is telling them to not reach out, not connect, not seek solutions, right? Just curl up and wait, and hopefully this thing will take care of itself. And it won't, unfortunately, because of the world that we live in. All the things that we're exposed to are just going to make that worse and worse and worse. And you get into this downward spiral that you really have to actively disengage something in there. You have to actively have an intervention, and sometimes it's incumbent on us to help somebody with that intervention, to make the suggestion for them. I think you need to try this, or would you consider trying this that has a money back guarantee, or would you come to a meeting, or would you come onto a Zoom call, or would you get on a conference call, or would you talk to my friend? Like, that connection piece of it is really, really important for that person who doesn't know where to turn. And I just said this, there's a linkage between all of this where you get into a vicious cycle where the stress leads to one, which leads to another, which leads to another, and you get into a vicious cycle that really needs to be actively circumvented, right? And we need to do that. So when we start talking about shifting from chronic stress and burnout to more of these labels that people get, very often you'll see people who say, I've been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, I've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And what I like to do is kind of reframe that for people and say, look, everything that I just talked about is really the root cause of those quote unquote diseases. So let's think about these in a different way. Let's think about these as an overactive stress response. Let's think of these as a low pool of stress resiliency in the face of this overload stress, and think about doing this sort of a rebalancing so that your stress resilience matches your stress load. It doesn't do me or any of you listening any good for me to say that the solution is for you to lower your stress or manage your stress. There's certainly things that we can do there that are going to help, but if we can also improve your resilience in the face of that high stress, which is unlikely to go away for most people, that's really going to help. So I like to reframe this and say it's not about stress-induced diseases. It's about these stress-induced imbalances, disruptions in what should be your body's normal state of balance. So you can see a little chart here. Stress is going to stimulate the adrenal glands. Why do we call it adrenal fatigue? Because the stress is telling those adrenal glands that sit right above your kidneys to start pumping out stress hormones so that we can run away from the lion, or we can fight the lion off. That's the fight or flight response. But when you're activating that every single day in traffic, and then every single day at work, and then every single day when you get home, and then every single day when you're worrying about paying the bills before you go to bed, that's not running away from the lion and getting away. That's activate. And so the adrenals, some people will say that they get exhausted and they can't produce cortisol anymore. That isn't exactly what's happening. What's happening is that the body is getting insensitive to cortisol. It's being pumped out all the time, and all these tissues that are responding to it respond by being catabolic, right? They break down, and your tissues don't want to break down, so they stop responding to it, and that leads to a host of other problems. Your body isn't responding, so your adrenals pump out even more. Your body's not responding, your adrenals pump out even more, and you get into this state of chronically medium cortisol with no rhythmicity to it. So you're fatigued in the day when you should be energetic. That's where this idea of fatigue comes from. And then you're restless at night because you have too much cortisol. So you don't have enough cortisol in the day, and you have too much cortisol at night when it should be flipped. And so that leads to the stereotypical early stage of this is that even if you sleep 8 hours a night, you're never energized in the day. You're always dragging yourself through the day, and then as soon as your head hits the pillow, your brain starts going and you can't get a good night's sleep. So you might be in bed for 8 hours trying to recover, but you're never able to get into those deep stages of sleep. So your body never recovers, your brain never recovers, your cortisol never recovers. And so you go through it the next day, the same thing, and the next day, the same thing, and the next day, the same thing. So what we want to do is try to intervene in there somewhere and say, wait a minute, there are things that we can do, right? So, I mentioned before, we can't really change the stress that's out there in the world, but we might be able to change your perception of it. We can help people avoid stressors or plan their response to certain stressors. We can help them adapt to the stressor better. We can help them accept the stressor so that we're not just, saying people, don't worry about what's happening to you. Don't be like, whistling a tune all day long, right? It's not that sort of a thing. But, accept the situation for what it is and then make a plan to have some strategy around what you're going to do for this stress or what you're going to do next time. We can also do things directly to the system, directly to the biochemistry and physiology with diet and nutrition and herbs and supplements, so that we can help the adrenals come back to life, so that we can help them become sensitive, the rest of the body to become sensitive to the right amount of cortisol. So when your adrenals produce the right amount, we'll respond to it and we don't become insensitive to it. So there's lots and lots of things we can do on both sides of that. This is a slide to remind me to kind of shift gears from burnout and adrenal fatigue to some of these other conditions, right? And what you see on this slide is they all overlap with each other, right? Chronic fatigue overlaps with anxiety, which overlaps with fibromyalgia, with overlaps with depression, with overlaps with irritable bowel syndrome and other sort of gut complaints, right? And so the fact that what we're trying to do here at Amare is come at all of these conditions simultaneously, because at their center, and you can see in this slide, what you see is prolonged fatigue states, pain, fatigue, stress, mood problems. All of it comes back to imbalances in the body. And if we can get those imbalances through that gut-brain axis optimized, or if we can get you rebalanced, we're going to have benefits in all of those areas. What is chronic fatigue anyway, right? If people who have not experienced chronic fatigue, it's the easiest way you can see sort of the symptomology of it on this slide. But people who I've counseled in the past, and we've done programs around chronic fatigue, where we'll get 30 chronic fatigue people in a room. They are not a barrel of monkeys, I'll tell you that, right? And I say that kind of dismissively like that because it's amazing to see them come in. They have no motivation. They obviously have no energy, right? That's the sort of hallmark of it. But they have a little bit of depression. They have a little bit of pain. They have a little bit of just this malaise where they're not happy about anything. If you tell them to go exercise, it makes the problems worse. They're fatigued in the day, but they're tense at night. Like what I was saying before, they can't get a good night's sleep. They'll be complaining to people about how tired they are, and their friend will just say, "Well, why don't you just go to sleep earlier, right? Why don't you go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up at 6 o'clock, and that's 8 hours, and you should feel refreshed." But they're not, because biochemically, their body's in a situation where they're not able to get into those deep phases of sleep where we actually recover. So they're in a terrible situation. But once you rebalance them in all of those ways, now their energy comes back in the day, their relaxation comes back at night, their brain fog lifts. Now they can exercise at a higher level, and they can get the endorphin rush and the endocannabinoid rush from the exercise. And now they go, now I understand what they talk about when people say they feel good when they exercise. That's something they've never experienced before. So people with chronic fatigue with that label have all the same symptoms as somebody with fibromyalgia. But the reason that we say that they're chronic fatigue syndrome versus fibromyalgia is because the CFS people are more lacking in energy. They're more on the fatigue side, and the fibro people are more on the pain side. And the difference between that, we really don't know why, even though they have the underlying same problems with stress and with stress response and with cortisol overexposure and with changes in their microbiome and gut-brain axis, those those triggers are expressed differently in those different people, and it probably has to do with how the microbiome is determining the expression of our body genes, right? There's probably a sort of a microbiome genetic interaction going on there, where one person's going to tip towards fibro and more pain, and one person's going to tip more towards chronic fatigue and the more more tiredness, symptomology. But with that as the backdrop, what can we do about it, right? We can first of all realize that it's all gut-brain axis. It's all signaling of these stress signals going back and forth between these two brains. So it's important for people to realize that there's an information superhighway going on here, and if we can send the right signals versus the wrong signals, we're going to help people in some very meaningful ways. And it goes both ways. It's the stress that's coming at us from the brain and being transmitted down, and it's those signals from our biochemistry and our physiology that are coming from internally and being signaled back out towards the brain. And if we can get the signals going both ways in a positive fashion, they truly synergize with each other and strengthen each other. And some of the ways to do that, I'm going to speak mostly in the next few minutes about the biochemical physiology, the pieces that we can do from the stress resilience side with nutritional products. But we're developing a whole range of interventions that are going to come at it from this side, from the mindfulness side. What do our thought patterns look like? What does our breathing patterns look like? What does our sleep hygiene look like in terms of what are we doing for the hour before we even climb into bed? What are our exercise patterns look like? Is there an appropriate way that we can exercise so that we reduce stress and reduce pain and increase energy and modulate cortisol all at the same time? There is, and we're actually putting a program together so that we can give people that right exercise regimen so they can get the benefits of that sort of runner's high experience. So what products across the Amari line are going to be most specifically targeted to this area of stress and stress resilience and adrenal fatigue and burnout and chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia? The first place to start is absolutely with the fundamentals pack. This is the one that was awarded the best new finished product of 2018 just a couple of weeks ago. And I want to just focus you on a couple of the metrics around why that kit, that gut-brain axis kit, is going to help with these conditions that I just talked about. So you can see here, increase in good bacteria, change in positive mood state scores and negative mood state scores. People are feeling better when they get the gut microbiome rebalanced. And the reason for how effectively these products work is because we're doing a lot. We've got amino acids in here like theanine, specifically sun-theanine, that's changing your brainwave patterns. This is able to take your brainwaves from tension and anxiety, which are beta waves, to a state characterized by alpha waves, which is a state of relaxed alertness. That's what an athlete would say is the zone. That's what a student would say would be being in a flow state, where you're in that zone, you're in that sweet spot of enough stress, but not too much stress. That relaxed alertness zone is where we want to be. We can get this effect in about 45 minutes in people, and this is built in to our Mentobiotics product. So it can take the edge off that stress in a really unique way that's governed by brainwave pattern fluctuations. Some of these other anti-stress resiliency kind of signals come directly from our gut, and they come from the bacteria. If we can get the bacteria producing the right compounds, we're going to get that proper, efficient signaling. So you can see the specific strains that we use here, specific strains of probiotic bacteria that help by lowering cortisol exposure, that help by improving calmness. And the reason that we get that is because of a increase in production of a neurotransmitter called GABA, that when we're stressed out, the body will access that GABA neurochemical to help relax us. And then that last one, that Helveticus, that's helping with serotonin metabolism in the gut, which is going to signal happy moods and signal relaxation to the brain in our head. So we're coming at this with multiple signals simultaneously. Some are coming from those brain waves that the theanine can do. Some are emanating from the gut because we're helping the bacteria produce more of the kinds of chemicals that we want. We can come at it from a neurotransmitter perspective, not just in the gut and not just in the brain, but out in the periphery. And this is where flavonoids come in, polyphenols, which can help with inflammatory signals, can help with blood flow, can help with neurotransmitter balance. And so one of the things that's interesting about each of these categories of phytonutrient is that some of them come on very quickly, like suntheanine, 45 minutes. Polyphenols are more of like 5 to 7 days. So we're talking about not 1 day, but now 1 week. And then the bacterial modulation that we're doing, changing the metabolism of those chemicals that the bacteria are making, that's something that comes on more 3 or 4 weeks in duration. So a month. So you've got effects that we can help with this stress resiliency in a day, later on in a week, later on in a month. And it's all different levels of modulation that are gonna increase that ability to adapt to whatever that stress profile looks like. When we look at a formula like Meant to Focus, this is all about getting the brain to be better at its job, to activate the brain. But we don't want to overactivate the brain. If you take, think about that Yerkes-Dodson curve again, right? If your brain is underactivated, you're bored, and you don't want to do any more of this, right? Because it's just not stimulating enough. If we overstimulate your brain, that in a sense is giving it too much stress. That's what high stimulant energy drinks and things like that do. You pound down a big monster and it's got 40 grams of sugar and 250 milligrams of caffeine. You're gonna take yourself from being bored to being jacked. And that's going to be a stress on your brain, which is going to be transmitted through the rest of the body. You do something like that in your brain, now you've got activated brain, but it's not useful activation. You've got activated brain that's sending stress signals to your adrenals. Now you're overproducing cortisol, leading to all that catabolic effect throughout the system. So what we do is we activate your brain, but we also activate the parts of the brain where we want to do more work, more memory, faster recall, but we also at the same time activate the areas of the brain that are associated with stress resilience and an ability to attenuate fear responses. So that allows you to be in a stressful situation and actually get the work done without being so activated that you're kind of jittery and not able to do useful work. So that's a different sort of an effect. And Zogenol, this pine bark extract, helps us along in that way by speeding up the processing of the brain. When we prime the immune system in an appropriate way, we improve vigor on its own. Just because the immune system is properly activated, right? Which means it's balanced. It's not overactivated and it's not underactivated. Just the fact that the immune system is optimized and can send those signals back and forth between these two brains, that in and of itself increases psychological vigor by 21%. Or the flip side of that is it would reduce your feeling of burnout by 21%, especially when you're in those stressful situations. When we look at an ingredient like Kana, the Zembrin brand that we use in our mood product, this is one of my favorite ingredients because not only does it help with depression and make people feel happier when they're feeling sad, but it also, with a single use, one use of a dose of Mood Plus, is going to improve your stress resilience. It's going to attenuate activity in a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is kind of the fear center, which is the panic center, which is the center of your brain that gets activated when some sort of a stressor, the boss says, "Hey, could you come into my office?" That's the amygdala that goes, "Oh, you know what, right? That, what's going to happen here?" That's the amygdala firing. If we can just attenuate that activity a little bit, then in that stressful situation, you're not so stressed, right? You can go, instead of you stepping back and saying, "I can't deal with this right now," you can step into it and say, "All right, let's do this. Here's the stress. I'm going to accept what that stress is, and I'm going to form a strategy around it." So we get that sort of an effect after one use. With continued use, you use Zembrin for 3 weeks, at the same dose that we have it in our mood product, you increase something called cognitive flexibility. This is the ability to really form strategies around what am I going to do about this stressful situation so that I'm more resilient now, and then what am I going to do when I encounter the same level of stress next time. That right there is the definition of stress resilience, being able to form those strategies and come at that stress in a way that matches it. Remember, I talked earlier about the importance of making sure that your stress wasn't up here or your resilience wasn't down there. You want to make sure that those are matched. That's where that vigor and vibrancy and motivation comes in, when we can have that matching all the time. We'll never get it all the time, but if we can get it more times than not, that's when we're going to get the benefits. So what happens when we have the difference between stress we're feeling right now and we want to feel more calm, we want to feel less tense and less stressed out, versus chronic stress, which leads to that catabolism, that catabolic breakdown effect? We can use an ingredient like sensoryl version of ashwagandha. One usage of it makes you go. It's sort of like in Indian medicine. It's sort of like the deep breath, where you supplement with ashwagandha, and it takes the edge off to the tune of about a 70% reduction in your feeling of stress, right? So that's good. Takes the edge off. But when you take it over time, and here the time course we're talking about is 4 weeks, supplementation with ashwagandha not only lowers your feeling of stress, it lowers your stress hormone profile. So that high cortisol is now back to normal. We can reduce that over 4 weeks by about 20-25%. But at the same time, that cortisol that we're bringing down is also counter-regulatory to a wide range of other hormones like testosterone and DHEA. So when your cortisol is high, that'll push down those anabolic hormones. And it happens in men, it happens in women. And when it happens in women, it's really, really noticeable. Sex drive goes down, depression goes up, body fat goes up, muscle mass goes down. So your body composition is changing, your mood is changing, your energy is changing. And part of it's because of the high cortisol, part of it's because it's the low DHEA and testosterone. And so if we can normalize those, bring the cortisol down 20-25%, bring the DHEA and the testosterone up 20, 25, 30%, and get you back in that balance point, all of those things normalize. Your stress resilience improves, your energy improves, your muscle mass comes back, your body fat drops a little bit. And this is one of the reasons that people say to us, they're like, I'm feeling better. And you know what? I lost weight last week. What's up with that? I didn't change my diet. Subconsciously, you might have been craving less of the ice cream and the comfort foods and the fast foods, and you might have been consuming some of that, but there's also this metabolic effect that's going on too, where now your lower cortisol is allowing your thyroid hormone to increase your metabolism a little bit. It's allowing your insulin to regulate your blood sugar levels. So now you're burning fat more minutes of the day because you're in that good fat burning zone because your blood sugar is normalized. So lots and lots of things cascade from this once you get those stress hormones under control. And then things like this, the Relora combination of magnolia bark and philodendron is reducing all of the negative mood states. It's reducing your anger and your irritability and your tension, and all those things that we perceive when we're under chronic stress are all being alleviated within the course of 4 weeks with this herbal that comes from traditional Chinese medicine. So just a couple more. That's talking about fundamentals, mentobiotics, meant to focus, meant to sync. It's talking about mood plus, but how can something like relief help? Relief can help because a big part of this stress hormone cortisol overexposure is pain, fibromyalgia. It is inflammation that is really high in people who have chronic fatigue and really high in people who have adrenal fatigue. So if you can directly affect that inflammatory cascade with a fast-acting turmeric and a long-lasting boswellia, we can go in there and we can block all the inflammatory enzymes that are there now, so your pain is alleviated quickly. as quickly as Tylenol or ibuprofen or one of those synthetics, but you don't get the side effects of those synthetics. And then we can keep your pain from coming back because something like Boswellia is going to reduce the production of new inflammatory enzymes. So we block the ones that are there with the turmeric, and then we slow the production of the new ones with the Boswellia. So you get an overall reduction in your inflammation, overall reduction in your pain and your stiffness. And that'll allow you to now be more physically active and now be able to get out there and get the benefits of the exercise. And the last one I'm going to talk about is the sleep product. People who are in these categories, I've said it a couple of times already, but I'll say it again, their chief complaint is that they're exhausted in the day and they're restless at night. They're dragging themselves through the day, and then as soon as they hit the bed, they can't sleep. And it's because their hormones are out of balance. Their neurotransmitters are out of balance. Their signaling across the gut-brain axis is out of balance. So if we can use something like sleep to improve their sleep quality at night, relax you, let you cycle appropriately through deep sleep and REM sleep, then the next day you're going to be more energetic and more able to handle the stress. That means that next night you're going to be less tense, you're going to cycle even better. The next day you're going to be more energetic and less tense. The next night you're going to be able to cycle even better. And so you get out of this vicious cycle into more of a virtuous cycle so that each day is getting better and better and better. That's the promise of not just getting better sleep, but getting better sleep so you have a better day, and then that better day leads to a better sleep, and that better sleep leads to a better day, and you get into that sort of thing. And then, just lastly, a lot of times when we're chronically stressed, we end up depleting our body of vital nutrients. We damage our neurons, and we need to protect our neurons and rebuild them. That's what the Bright Mind proprietary blend does. When we're chronically activating that stress response system, we're lowering our levels of calcium and magnesium and all the B complex vitamins and vitamin C and vitamin D, and we need to make sure that we're replenishing that so that we can replenish what the stress response has sort of robbed us of, but that we can also replenish so that we're able to mount an appropriate and a robust stress response when we need to. And that's where a product like VitaGBX comes in. So my last slide is this, just to remember again, every single person is somewhere on this mental wellness continuum. And if you're a 10 or an 11 or a 12, awesome. I want to challenge you to reach down to somebody who's a 5 and get them to a 6. And those 6s, I want you to reach down to somebody who's a 2 or 3 and get them to be a 4. Because once they get to be a 4, then they're going to go, yeah, I want to have what you have. I want to be where you are. I want to have the same level of energy and fire and motivation and vigor and all of that. We want to get everybody going in the same direction. This is a journey. This is a mission that we've created this whole company around, and it's really in our grasp now in a way that's never existed before. So I think we're going to help a lot of people in a lot of really important ways. So I'm not sure how long we went, Pat. We're exactly right on,
dude. You're right. You nailed it.
Can we go a little bit longer? Get some questions.
Absolutely,
Okay?
absolutely. This is awesome. I'm just going to stop sharing, and then we'll come on back over here. You were on fire tonight. I loved it. I took a huge amount of notes and I thought it was awesome. So, all right, you guys. So let's just click through this real quick and see if we can't nail out some of these. So do you know much about Lyme disease?
I know a ton about Lyme disease.
Is that another deep dive topic?
That could be. I talked a lot about Lyme disease when we did our topic about immune system priming. I grew up in Massachusetts, where Lyme disease is an epidemic.
Yep.
One of the problems with Lyme is that the treatment for Lyme, antibiotics, completely decimates your gut. And so people who have these residual, persistent, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, burnout kinds of symptoms, it's not because of the Lyme. It's because of the side effects of the treatment of getting rid of that infection. So your microbiome is decimated, your stress hormone exposure is probably in that sort of fatigued state. And so what you need to do is exactly what I talked about here, because it's gonna get your stress hormones back to normal. It's gonna get your immune system back to where it is, and you're gonna start to come back to life.
So that's a reboot and a fundamentals process.
Exactly.
Right?
Just reboot and fundamentals is exactly where to start if somebody is post Lyme, and then after that, then you can go, okay, do I need more help with my sleep? Do I need more help with my pain? Do I